Hello, Classical Humanities, first and sixth period. This will be my final lecture on Rome and actually my final lecture of the year. That might surprise some of you, but I am now moving towards the end of the Roman unit, as is Miss Stearns in first period. And we're going to wrap things up here in a week or two with a assessment of the unit and more details on that to follow. Sixth period, you will have one more assignment um, on Christianity this week. And yeah, so I'm going to wrap things up today. After the Roman unit, I'm thinking about a project to finish the year with, something different and to experiment. And so, yeah, today this will be the last lecture. And I am looking at engineering, Christianity, and then the fall of Rome. So engineering, there's two links here that I want you guys to check out. The first is on the Pantheon, and the second is on Trajan's column. So I'm not going to actually lecture too much about engineering. In addition to that, sixth period, you guys covered the Roman engineering worksheet. That was your homework for this week. And first period, I'm sure you guys will look at this in some way, shape, or form as well. Yes, the Pantheon. Um, yeah, before we get to the Pantheon, when we talk about Roman engineering, we've got a lot to talk about here. It's one of the greatest legacies of the Roman Empire, Roman culture. We have roads, we have arches, we have aqueducts, we have central heating system. So there's a lot going on here. The Pantheon, you should check that out on the video here. I want you to watch that. There's 5 questions about that. The Pantheon, one of the great temples of ancient Rome. But one point, this isn't quite touched upon in the video, one point about the Pantheon is that it survives. It survives when other great temples of Rome do not. It was a pantheon to all the gods, so yes, it had an added grandeur, but grandeur didn't save every building. If we look, for example, the Colosseum, an even grander structure, the Colosseum was stripped of all its marble, all its gold, all its decorations. The Pantheon was left fully intact, and it is beautiful inside. Why was this? Well, the reason that the Pantheon was retained and maintained and not torn down was because it was converted into a Christian church. And as Catholicism took over in Rome and it became the seat of the Roman Catholic Church, this meant that its future was ensured. So that is the reason the Pantheon was left fully intact in all its splendor. Right, and we'll come back to Christianity in a while. Now, we also have here alternative material on Trajan's column. Trajan's column, there'll be questions in the Google quiz on this. It really is extraordinarily detailed. It's like an instruction manual or a comic strip or perhaps a story of Trajan's invasion of Dacia. And Dacia, an empire, or I should say an empire, a tribe, a very large tribe in Eastern Europe that Trajan, the Emperor Trajan, subdued. Trajan regarded as one of Rome's greatest emperors. And one of the remarkable features I find about Trajan's column is that it does show, actually, in certain places, how to do certain things. For example, it gives a pretty much textbook definition of how to erect a fort and so forth. So very interesting there. So check that one out as well. And there is a really cool website from National Geographic that is worth reading. All right, on to Christianity then. Let me just get a drink of water here. So, with sixth period, certainly you guys are going to get a activity in which we talk more about early Christianity, that is the historical person of Jesus, and how this came about and how this came to be so influential. I know that many of you are active Christians, devout. Some of you are not, and some of you might be atheist. But regardless of what your outlook is here on this, whether or not you believe that Jesus is the Son of a God or there is a God, Uh, he is an extraordinary, influential person. Um, Now, the document that I'm going to share with Sixth Period looks at some of these discussions, some of the controversies about Jesus, about why it was he came to be, and about the difficulty in the Bible as an historical source. Obviously, to some of you, it is an article of faith, but as an historical source, it is problematic. That is not to say that it's false. I'm not saying that, but it is problematic for many reasons. We'll talk about those in a while. But let's look here from the Roman context. How did Christianity come to Rome? And the person who is most responsible for that is Saint Paul. Saint Paul, traditionally given credit for the spread of Christianity in Rome, he was a person who traveled widely. He's a person who originally actually persecuted Christians. And then, though he was converted, and he is key because he was the first person to really spread Christianity beyond the Jewish people. He spread it to the Gentiles, to the non Jewish peoples. And so he's a very important character in our story. Now, many of you will know, quite famously from movies like Gladiator and so forth, that Christians were persecuted in Rome, that they were even used as entertainment in the gladiatorial arenas, and that people like Nero and Trajan, even considered a very effective emperor, persecuted Christians. Why was this? Why did the Romans persecute Christians when they tolerated other religions? One of the keys to the Roman success was that they were quite happy to absorb other deities into their pantheon of gods. So yeah, let's fit him in here, somewhere between Jupiter and Mars. But no, the Christians wouldn't have this because, of course, a key part of Christian faith is that there is only one God. Um, this is made very, very clear in the Bible. And one of the commandments is, thou shalt not worship other gods. And so Christians could not accept the Roman gods. And of course, in the era of the empire, this meant they could definitely not accept the idea of the emperor as a living God. This led to a clash. This was subversive. And this led to Christianity being suppressed. Now, in return, the Christians had to obviously find some way of getting the word of their services and gospel around, and they did so by building a secret network of tombs beneath the city of Rome called the catacombs. Catacombs are one of those things in Rome that you can visit. I have been to Rome, been to the Vatican. I did not visit the catacombs. They have secret underground chambers where early Christians were buried, where they could actually hold services. But why did Romans embrace this faith? There were many, many different faiths springing up all over the ancient world on a regular basis. People claiming that they could explain the meaning of life and why things were, and filling in that gap for science. Why did Christianity take off? One of the key things here is the gospel of Christianity, and I'm afraid this is something that's been lost over time. Is that Christianity promotes a gospel which holds that people are fundamentally equal. And it does not value wealth. It does not value wealth. It is a gospel that values charitable giving. It says famously there is the phrase that it is easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. Unfortunately, that meaning has been lost as Christianity has been hijacked by people who want to promote wealth-seeking schemes, etc. But anyway, that's the true gospel of Christianity: charity and wealth and forgiveness and love and all that good stuff. And this appealed, of course, to slaves in Rome. It appealed to slaves because um, there were, of course, I don't need to tell you how slaves were subjected and exploited. And so Christianity offered the idea, the goal of everlasting life in heaven with our Heavenly Father after death. And this was quite powerful, of course. It was also powerful to the poor in Rome. And finally, it spread to women as well. It seemed that the rich were the last to really get on board with Christianity. Now, a key person in the story of Christianity is Constantine. Now, Constantine is also well known because it was he, Constantine, who split the Roman Empire into two halves. That is, a Western administrative half that would continue to be ruled from Rome, and an eastern half that would be ruled from Constantinople, which of course was named after Constantine. Constantinople, modern day Istanbul, a very important cultural historic city. It joins Europe and Asia. It is straddled on the divide of those two. Constantine, the rumors of how he embraced Christianity, there's different stories about it. One of the legends is that before a great battle, that Constantine asked for a sign from God, if God was real, if God was with him, that he would give him a sign. And apparently it was a shooting star, and Constantine embraced this. Whether or not this is true, I mean, obviously a lot of people would be highly dubious about this. The point being is that Constantine embraced Christianity on his deathbed, and he converted to Christianity. Uh, for quite a while before that, persecutions had stopped, Christianity had become so popular. But after Constantine's endorsement, it mattered. It mattered because now it was free. It was not only free, it was favored upon by the wealthy elite in Rome to embrace Christianity. And it took off in a major way. And so when we talk about legacy, one of the great legacies of Roman culture is Christianity. Christianity is the most followed faith in the world, whether one is Roman Catholic or Presbyterian or Baptist or Mormon or whatever it is. All these faiths are derived from a belief that Jesus was the Son of God, and therefore it's a very important legacy of Rome. It's spread throughout the networks of Rome, throughout those famous roads we talk about, and also with that organizational structure that the Romans bring. They developed a top-down structure. You had a pope, a head of the church in Rome. The first head of the church was Peter, Saint Peter, the famous Peter, the apostle of Jesus. But then we have bishops, we have priests, we have a whole top-down structure. Now, there are problems, though, in the spread of Christianity. And one of the issues is in that in the early years, before this Roman organization is truly brought to bear, you have much disputes over the gospel of regarding Jesus. And one thing we should keep in mind here, and this is an historical fact here, and most Christians don't know this, is that the four Gospels that make up the traditional Bible, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in which millions and millions of people around the world base their faith upon, were not the only Gospels. Ultimately, there were around 20 different Gospels written about the story of Jesus, about the teachings of Jesus. And that's obviously problematic because many of them disagreed with each other. There are different faiths. In some of these stories, Jesus was adopted by God, was not his son. In others, they do not even see Jesus as a divine being. In some of the Gospels, he has different relationships with people like Mary Magdalene. There are suggestions of a brother and so forth. And there are different interpretations as to some of the practices that were carried out. Now, why the confusion? Well, the reality is, and this brings us back to the problem of the Bible as an historical source. Obviously, a book with many teachings to be taken from it, many great moral teachings. However, it was not written down during Jesus' lifetime. None of the Gospels were. All of these things were written down by people after Jesus' death. And so these were not primary accounts. They were accounts written down by the likes of Matthew and Mark on the stories told by other people. So what to do about all this? Were we going to have multiple forms of Christianity with totally different versions? Well, no. A very pivotal moment, the Nicene Council in 325 AD, the Catholic Church is solidified. They make a decision that there will only be four Gospels, and all of the other Gospels are banned. They are made illegal. And many of these Christian sects were actually put down by using the imperial troops of the Roman Empire, and many of these Gospels come as a last. Some, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, turn up later. And so, again, it reminds us that the Bible, it is a product of men. It is a product of men, and that's something to bear in mind as we look at that as an historical source. Now, We're now going to come to the story of the fall of Rome to finish this off. Usually I would have an activity on this. I think I'm going to skip it this year. Over time, Roman authority became weaker. As I mentioned earlier, the Roman Empire split into two parts. The eastern part, ruled from Constantinople, actually survives much, much longer. In fact, for 1,000 years longer. But the western Rome, uh, ruled from Rome itself, becomes weaker. Why is this? Well, there are numerous reasons put forward. It's one of the great discussed things in Roman history, the fall of the Roman Empire. Why was it? Books have been written on it. I will discuss some of those theories for you in a minute. What we can say is that it slowly fell apart and that barbarian hordes invaded. Barbarian hordes, of course, given this name, depicted in Roman literature as terrible people. Rome was sacked repeatedly. What does being sacked means? It means that people attack into the city. It means that they basically steal, they rape, they loot, and they leave. So these weren't conquering peoples, as more they were attacking and taking. Um, Constantinople remained wealthy. In the east, they had the money to pay off invaders. Constantinople, though, did become a fortress city in a way Rome never was, but that allowed it to survive. So, what were these things undermining the Roman Empire? Well, a number of key things. First of all, we have the Huns, Central Asian people attacking into the Europe. The Huns actually didn't really attack at the Roman Empire itself. They attacked into far, far east of Europe, but they had a knock-on effect. These ferocious tribes, Attila the Hun, the famous Hun leader, these horsemen, these warriors, they drove other groups such as the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Saxons. And these groups then, in turn, fled in the face of the Huns, and they attacked into the Roman Empire. Note the names of some of these groups: the Goths, the Vandals. These are names that are really have negative associations because, of course, they're named as such by the Romans. Other reasons for the fall of Rome, well, there's numerous reasons. One of the big causes was the fact that Rome became too decadent, too luxurious. What does this mean? Well, it means that Rome, because of their great conquests, had a higher percentage of slaves than any other civilization in world history, with slaves doing the work for them in the fields. There is the belief by some historians, such as the famous Edward Gibbon, that Rome became weak, became soft. In addition to this, the Roman army, which had once been made up of a citizen corps, was increasingly dependent on auxiliaries. Auxiliaries, of course, are really in a way a form of mercenary. So mercenaries are not going to be something that will keep the empire strong in the long term. Then we could have other factors like simply a run of incapable emperors, inefficient, corrupt, weak emperors who in turn weaken the empire. Also, there is the belief that Christianity weakened the empire. Well, how could it? This theory is a very interesting one. The idea being that Christianity, with its gospel of love thy neighbor, with its emphasis on devotion and praying and charitable works and being pious, that it was totally moved away from military um, virtues, away from strength and conquering and glory, and by doing so, that it weakened the empire. I think all of these have merit, all of them have merit. But one thing that also could be mentioned, and I haven't here in the slides, and sadly it connects back to our own current crisis and the coronavirus crisis, is that Rome was weakened by diseases. By diseases, there's a lot of evidence being uncovered that this was the case, and a more modern view is that disease was at the heart of this. Why was Rome particularly subject to epidemics, to infectious diseases, viruses? Well, think about it. Rome was the first mega city in the world, the first city to have over 1 million people, and therefore, in densely populated, packed areas, disease spreads more rapidly. Just think about New York at the moment. than the terrible suffering that they're going through. Also, Rome had built up this extraordinary trading network. Roman roads. Well, all roads lead to Rome. Diseases also worked their way back along these roads. And finally, the army, the great military conquerors, all these famous Roman generals and their legions. Well, they mixed freely in these places. They mixed with local peoples. Not all of these soldiers returned back to Rome, but many, many of them did. With them, they brought new things, wonderful things, culture, trade, and making Rome such a cosmopolitan city. But they also brought back diseases, and that is a theory I certainly accept. And yeah, so that's a very interesting story. That brings us to the end of Rome, the end of antiquity. Traditionally, now in the course, I will go on to look at the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. This year, I'm thinking about a project, but before any of that, of course, we're going to have an assessment on what you know about Rome. It will be a GBQ on the Roman legacy. I will announce more details about that later on this week or early next week. Thank you, and look out for that Google quiz.